So good evening, Gladiator family. Excuse me. We are so excited to have this workshop tonight for you guys to speak about our nationally recognized monthly theme. For this month is National Grief Awareness Month. And we have a community agency who we are partnering with to provide you guys with a lot of great information to help you guys cope with losses and grief and kind of guide you guys through the bereavement process. We know we're dealing with a multitude of, grief and loss, as well as our students who are dealing with like social, that loss of social interaction and contact. So we know grief does not only imply the death of a loved one, it can also imply a loss of a friendship, a relationship for our students, our social interaction. So we're so excited to have this information for you guys to use to kind of guide you guys through this time, this difficult time that we all are experiencing. So with that being said, I am recording and I will have this presentation available on our website for all parents to access at your convenience. We want to make sure all of our all of our parents have access to this information in case you were not able to be present with us tonight. We know that this topic is very touchy, it's very sensitive, and it can cause a lot of great, trauma, traumatic experiences, emotions, feelings, and sadness. So please use this time to kind of, seek help if needed, but also ask questions for our expert that we have here today, Miss Tammy, and I'll have her kind of introduce her agency and proceed with the workshop for tonight. All right, so Miss Tammy, the attention is all yours.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Tammy Otnod, and I work with an agency called Pathways, and we provide compassionate care to families living with illness and loss. And there's an emphasis on the living with illness and loss, because we do believe you can move forward in spite of loss. And so I've actually the agency is about 37 years old. We've been working in the greater Long Beach area and partner with 5 different school districts. ABC is one of them, and we're really proud to work alongside you guys and just kind of give you some tips and things that we have learned along the way in dealing with grief and loss. So if you wouldn't mind, Jasmine, just starting our little presentation. I have a little PowerPoint because that's how I like to do things, keep us on track. And I am normally a very informal trainer, and so Zoom, I can't see your hands, so I'll try to leave spaces for you guys if you have questions too, okay? All right, here we come. There we go. We're getting so proficient nowadays on technology. Okay, we're gonna do it here. Hold on. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So we're going to be talking about helping your child through grief, but grief is just like we talk about on an airplane. In order to help your kids, you always have to help yourself first, right? They always tell you to put on the mask before you help your kids. So some of the stuff I'm talking about is really going to apply to any of us that are dealing with grief and loss, but particularly we want to make sure you guys have skills and some different tools in your toolbox in case you and your family have experienced loss during this time. So let's go ahead and move through. What is grief? It's simply the natural response to loss. People are like, oh, it's so complicated. It's like, no, grief, a lot of times they say grief is the cost of love, right? That it really is when you love someone and it's no longer there, it's going to cause a reaction, and that reaction is grief that we have to work through. And that's going to be what we're talking about today. So what can you grieve? Jasmila gave you a couple of things. You can grieve a loss of a job. It can be simple as that. A lot of people have lost their jobs. You can grieve the death of a loved one. You can grieve financial stability. A lot of people are struggling with that. That's a big thing. You can lose a breakup or a divorce is a loss for us. There is a loss of a pet, whether a pet dies or runs away. There's a loss and grief involved in that. Loss of a home if you have to move or you can't afford to pay for your home. And I think there's, yeah, and then declining health. Anybody that's had like a chronic illness or anything that causes us to lose our health is something that we actually grieve and we find people doing. So anything that we talk about today, we're going to kind of focus on death. But anytime you lose anything, any of these types of things, you're going to probably have a grieving portion happening in your life. You're going to notice some of these things are familiar with any of these types of things just as much as they are as with the death. So some facts about kids. These were surprising facts to me when I first heard these. 1 in 5 children will experience the death of someone close to them by the age of 18. That's just a common fact. The next fact is 1 out of every 20 children aged 15 and younger will suffer the loss of one or both parents. And these statistics don't account for the number of children who lose a parental figure. So like a grandparent that helps take out or take care of the kids, or an aunt or a really close family member. So that's a pretty high statistic for people. The third one is that it is estimated that 73,000 children die every year in the US, and of those, 83% have surviving siblings. So a lot of kids actually have a brother or sister that dies during the year too. So death is pretty common in school-age children, even though we don't always think of that. So how does that show up in school? Let's see. Oh, 100% of us have experienced a loss this year of some sort, true? Maybe loss of being able to go to our jobs, maybe not being able to socialize with our friends or family. Thanksgiving's coming up, that's going to be different. All of us have experienced loss this year. But let's look at how it shows up in what teachers have seen in schools. All right, the first thing is that students who have lost a parent or a close family member often exhibit, these are things that they've noticed through the surveys, difficulty concentrating in class. 87% of our teachers said that they noticed that kids struggle with that they have a hard time focusing. Even without COVID, remote learning, distance learning, it was hard in classrooms. So imagine now even on Zoom or on Google Class, it's really much more difficult for them to concentrate. We see withdrawing and disengagement and less class participation. 82% notice that. Absenteeism makes sense because a lot of times there's a lot to do, a lot of family and arrangements to make. So they notice that there's a lot of absenteeism, and also a lot of things like stomach aches or headaches show up physically in kids. And so there's a lot more absenteeism when kids are dealing with loss. There's a decrease in the quality of work. 68% saw that. So students that maybe were A students have started to we see their grades start to slip a little. Maybe they become a B or a C, or they start not turning in their assignments in the way that they used to do. You actually can physically see that from when they bring it in. And then the other thing that they notice is that there's less reliability in turning in their assignments. And that's a lot of times because the home is kind of chaotic when there's been a death and there's a lot of different things going on. And just like the kids are having trouble, difficulty concentrating, parents are having difficulty concentrating and remembering. We're all trying to just do the next thing. And so we're all kind of in a state of trying to figure it out. So that would make it natural that these things would happen in a family. But when your teacher sees it, that's typically when they'll refer it to maybe a counselor, like, hey, I'm noticing some stuff's going on. And a lot of times people don't think, has there been a death in the family? Has there been a big loss that's happened? And those are things that we need to be asking so that we can see if that's what it is, how can we help them get the services to help them with that? So 2 of the big things that we talk about are styles of grief. And this is really helpful in your family units. There's a primary style that we tend to draw towards or navigate towards. And we always think that the way that we do it is how everybody should do it. That's just what we think, but that is not true. So there's the styles of grief based by Terry Martin and Kenneth Doka, very well-known people in grief and loss forums. Talk about intuitive grief as being that's experienced as waves of emotion. They mirror your inner feelings and emotions. They are more feeling than thinking, and they are focused on exploring and expressing those feelings and processing emotions. They call it a more feminine way of grieving, but I'm going to tell you right now, I know lots of men that are intuitive grievers, and when they talk about the masculine one, I know lots of women who are the other one too. So that's just a silly thing, I think. But it is true. These are the ones that when someone dies, the person that has a hard time They cry. There's a lot of crying. There's a lot of wanting to talk about it, talk about the person. They have a hard time maybe functioning, getting things done because there's just so much emotion and they want to talk about it. They really do want to really talk about it all the time. And because they're processing that, they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to make sense of it. And the way that they do that is through their talking, through their emotions, through their feelings and getting them all out. They want to process it that way. The other style is called instrumental grief. And that is where it's experienced in more physical or cognitive ways. It's also expressed in physical, cognitive, or behavioral ways. It's more thinking than feeling. And it's focused on doing and actively responding to grief. And so these are the ones that immediately after a death, these are the people that get busy cleaning the house up, making all the arrangements. If it's a person that goes back to work right away, maybe they're out a day and then they're back to work and people are like, I can't believe they're back to work. They're the ones that decide they're going to add a remodel on about a week after there's been a death in the family. They're just doing. And it's not because they're not grieving, it's how they grieve. It's a different way of grieving. So that's why it's so hard when you see that they're more thinking than feeling, and the other ones are more feeling than thinking. When you have a family and you have two of them and you have an instrumental and an intuitive, we've seen this many times in a family where somebody is intuitive, thinks that that other person's not talking. And because they're not talking, expressing, they didn't love or miss the person. They're not grieving. And that's not true. And the instrumental person is sick of talking about it because it's too much for them to be thinking. They want to get work done. They're like, if you just sit there and cry all day, we're not going to get anything done and we got things to do. But the truth is both are grieving. And if you can understand that there are different styles, you can actually begin to look at one another and understand. You can seek to understand. So somebody who's instrumental needs to know that if somebody in their family is intuitive and that's how they are, they're going to have to take a few moments and decide they're going to have to listen to them because it's important to them. That's how they're processing the death. And an intuitive griever is going to have to know they're going to probably have to find some other people to do that as well, because the person that's instrumental is not going to be able to do that wholeheartedly for them. And they may have to do some things like get up and help clean a little bit to make them feel like they're being supported. It's not a right or wrong way. It's just two different styles that you can kind of look to. And I think that a lot of times when you're not grieving, you don't recognize this. But when you initially have a death and you see this come in, you realize which one you tend to be. And you can sometimes even see why you've struggled with some other people in your grieving because you're wanting them to be the way that you are and they're not. Should we take questions, Jasmila, in that before, or shall we just wait till the end? What's the best way? Because that one sometimes has questions.
Okay. Ms. Perez, do we have any questions in the chat box?
No.
Any comments?
At this point.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay. No, thank you. All right. So the next thing I was going to talk to you about is the grief compass model. And a lot of people think that when they're looking at grief, it's a process, and they talk about Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And actually, that was created for anticipatory grief. It was through hospice as people were approaching death. It wasn't really meant to be after the death. She has come back and said that it was never meant to be linear in the first place, and they've added some things to it to make it not be so linear. But if you look at people that are currently in the field of death and dying, the models that they look at are attached to Bill Warden's 4 tasks of grief. And they're talking about the ways that we were constantly working through the grief and the loss of the person that we have loved and has died. And Dr. Bill Hoy is somebody that worked with our agency, and he actually worked hand in hand with Bill Warden on creating this so that it's easier for students to maybe comprehend. And even as family members, I think we can kind of understand, like, are we on the right path when we're grieving? Are we doing the right things, the things that are helpful to us? So I love the idea of a compass, because if you've ever held a compass in your hand, it's always a little shaky because you're always kind of moving. And that's what grief feels like. It's like you are no longer on solid ground. It's like, I don't know what's happening. Anytime I turn, I have a different feeling or an emotion, and I'm not sure what to do. So these 4 areas, like just like the compass has northwest, east, and south, these have 4 like markers for us to kind of look at and say, are we on the right path? Are we normal in our grief? Because we always feel like we're not normal in our grief. One of them is the area of remembering. And this is where we share stories, we're reflecting on the values and evaluating the impact of their life. And this is done like at the funeral, maybe right after a death, if you gather at someone's home. It's also maybe on their birthday or a holiday. We're remembering and telling the stories, especially with the holidays coming up now. You're going to really notice that empty chair at a table. And so stories are really good things to help us remember how important that person was and sharing those values. And that means that it doesn't mean that you're not over the death, even if it's been 2 years or 5 years. It's a natural part of the grief process. So it's okay to think, I really do miss this person, and talk about those things. Realizing is when you're coming to terms with the reality of the death and the magnitude of the pain. Because death hurts. If you love a person and they die, it hurts. And we have that reality when they first tell us the person has died. And we also have that reality when we go to pick up a phone to call them and we realize we can't call them anymore because they're not there. We also notice this at key times when a graduation comes. And maybe you're moving along fine and all of a sudden you realize, my dad's not going to be at my graduation, or my mom, right? Or my grandparents. It's when you go to get married. These key places in our life, we kind of forget until those things come up. And then all of a sudden we'll feel a big surge of grief. And we'll think, oh no, I'm like way back at the beginning. And you're not really back at the beginning. This is a natural part of the grief process. It's just coming to a deeper level of understanding of the loss, the realization that loss, it's a loss with a lot of future things that come into play. And so if you realize when you realizing, there you go. When you come to terms with that, or you notice that, you can know I am just on the normal path of grief. This is normal for me to kind of feel this again right here, because this is a monumental point in my life. This is a big deal. Reaffirming is where we're trying to make sense of what the heck happened. It's finding the spiritual and philosophical anchors and meaning that support in this loss. So for many people, when they talk about spiritual, it's for people that are trying to figure out grief is so heavy, they're trying to be able to lay it down. So they're finding out what can help me lay this grief down. So if people are spiritual, you'll hear a lot, well, they're in heaven. They're in heaven now. Or you might hear philosophical things like they're not in any more pain, right? Anymore. And so you feel like you can let those down. It might be, I sense their presence around me. I saw a butterfly come to my window. A lot of kids talk about seeing hummingbirds and butterflies, very common. And they really feel comforted by that when they see something that reminds them. They might say they're with my grandpa now in heaven, and so I feel good with that. Or they're with the angels. Different things that we say that help us find meaning or what's happened to them. Where did they go? Why am I going to be okay because they're not here with me anymore? And that's very normal for them to do that. And there's different questions that come at different times based upon their development of what they believe and know. And then the last marker that we see is this releasing. And this is saying goodbye to the relationship as we know it, the physical one, and moving into a future without their physical presence. And this one is again, it's ongoing. It's not a one and done. We have to say goodbye at the funeral or when they bury them or when they cremate them, right? That's a common thing. We have to say goodbye there. But we're also still, again, having to move forward with that. And the thing that we like to remind everybody is it's not leaving them behind, it's moving forward with them, because memories are going to last forever. And so the way that person impacted you, that's why storytelling is so important, and sharing how that person has impacted you. For example, my dad was really good with teaching me the value of money and of friendship. So when I look and I'm noticing that my bank account looks good or I'm doing really good things, I think to myself, oh, thanks, Dad, for helping me do this. And I've shared with my kids, like, the reason you're able to go to college is because my parents instilled in me the ability to be good with money, and that's enabling you to go to school without any student loans, right? So I get to carry him forward and be grateful to the things that he taught me as I move forward. I don't leave him behind. I don't have a physical relationship with him anymore, but I can take those things that he added on to me. When my mom was a really good cook and I cook for others, I think in the kitchen, oh, I learned this from my mom. I'm so grateful my mom allowed me to do these things. So the ways that we can tell those stories or those values helps us bring them forward. But it doesn't mean at times I don't feel sad if I'm in the kitchen and realize that too, right? Like, oh, I miss my mom now because I'm cooking and I wish she were here cooking with me, right? I'm realizing she's not here, but I'm not deep in grief. I'm sad. I am grieving, but I'm okay. And the stories actually make me feel better. They comfort me. So these are just kind of markers that we can see if you're noticing these things happening to you, to know that you are on the right path. You are not off-roading somewhere, anywhere. You're just like, this is grief and I'm doing okay. Or your kids are doing okay if you see these things in them. Okay. So how it might look in different stages of kids, because I think it's important for us to know what's normal and what's not. So in elementary school and middle, when you talk to them, they may think of the person that has died is a ghost, an angel, or a skeleton. In their mind, if you really talk to them, those are things that they think that they're like. They also think, they're often interested in specific details of the death and what happens to the body after death. That's why we talk a lot about the importance of families allowing the students to go to the funeral, or if they're interested, if you do a viewing, I think they call them something else now, but when they can go and they can see the body, it's actually very helpful to them for them to see. It doesn't usually harm them unless they're not presentable type of thing. They want to know how they feel, what they look like, if they were cremated, what does that mean? Actually, when they're not with their families, they ask us all kinds of questions just like that. So if you feel comfortable letting them ask all those questions, just let them know what do you want to know? And be willing to share those things with them. Kids may experience a wide range of emotions. The big things that we notice are guilt, anger, shame, anxiety, fear, and they worry about their own death because now they've realized people can die, right? They feel guilty that they were the cause of it. And there's a lot of shame. They don't want other kids to know a lot of times because they feel like they're different now. And so those are things that we see. They worry about who's going to take care of them and may experience insecurity and fear of abandonment because one parent died, especially if one parent died or a grandparent that took care of them, they're really scared about the other one if there's another one. Like, well, what happens if they die? There's a lot of those things. And so helping to reduce their anxiety and let them know we've got a plan. Your mommy takes care of herself. I do all that I can, but we tell them not to promise. Don't promise them that you'll be okay because you don't know. But say, you know what, you're going to be okay. We've got this people set up. You're good. Kind of help reassure them and let them know you're doing what you can, but you can't promise because we did have a family that they were actually in our grief group. The mom had died, and in the middle of our grief group, I think it was on our third session, the dad actually died, and the daughter said he told me he would never leave me, and it's like he didn't want to leave you. It wasn't his choice to leave you, but it was really hard because he had promised her that he would never leave her, and that's not a promise we can really keep. So honesty is really important with kids. And they may worry they are to blame for the death, even if if they think maybe that fight I had the other day, or I didn't clean my room when mommy said, and then she died, is because I didn't clean my room, right? Little things like that kind of cause them to think, and it's not true, but it's what they think internally. For our teens, it's a little different because they do have an adult understanding of the concept of death, but they don't have the experience of it, the coping skills, or the behavior of an adult. Even though they look like an adult a lot of times, they don't have that. And they will want you to think they do, but they don't. Number two is they may strike out. We see this in anger at family members or show impulsive or reckless behavior, such as substance abuse or fighting in school. We see a lot of acting out in teens because they don't know how to handle those emotions. They have them, but they don't know how to get them out. And so this is where we tend to see them maybe having to go to the counselor's office because they've been in a fight, or you start noticing that they're acting strange and you're thinking they might be taking some drugs. The reality of death contradicts the teens as being invincible and may cause them to question their faith or understanding of the world. It really does kind of rock their foundation because they really do think everybody lives forever. And then they realize that maybe they could die. And that may cause them to question their faith. Like, why would a God, especially with a lot of them, why would a God let this happen? And sometimes parents want to make them have to just believe something at the time, but it's actually okay for them to question why, because it's part of their healing and their grieving. They're going to come to terms on their own with what they believe, whether or not you force it or not. So we always tell parents, let them explore. Say, well, if you're not sure about that, who could you talk to about that? Who would be a good person? Do you want to talk to somebody from a church if that's something that you're questioning? Or maybe it questions them towards, they want to know, like, what happens? Is there really a God? Is there a heaven? Who can we talk to? We want to be able to just find a way to connect them to someone that could help them make those decisions, figure that out, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else. We want to allow them the opportunity to do that. And then 5, I think there's one more. Is there one more? Their coping strategies may create tension with family members. And that is because a lot of times when somebody has died, families want all the family to be together all the time. They want to just all hunker down and be all together with kumbaya moments. And sometimes for kids, that is the last thing that they want to do. They really want, they're maybe more like that instrumental griever, and they want to get out and go be with their friends and escape it for a little bit. It's too much for them. And it's not because they are not sad about the person dying. It's like they need a break from it. And so a lot of times in families, we have to talk to them about, like, well, what is the compromise? Maybe you have to be home some with your family because your parents and your family need that, but they have to also be willing to let you go out a little too. It's all about compromise, right? In that stage of life anyways, and helping them ease the tension. But a lot of families feel very, their causes a lot, they get put on, they get into trouble a lot just because of that, just that tension. And it really is a coping strategy. So helping the parents understand too, that that's something they're going to have to do. So how does grief affect you and your children? These are some things we're going to kind of talk about. Loss brings change. We've seen that this year, not just with loss of death, but we've seen it a lot of things. There's changes at home. There's changes in routine. There's changes at school. And there's changes in relationships. This happens. There's a lot of change going on. And so the things that we have to do as parents is we have to acknowledge the change and ask your child or children, what have they noticed? What do you guys notice that's different, right? Because there have been differences. Sometimes they have to take on roles that they didn't want to take on. And it may not be that they can change that, but to be able to acknowledge, yeah, that is a new thing you have to do, right? That is something, I'm sorry that happened. You know, I wish it wasn't like that, but we have to kind of figure this out together. School, there's changes. Maybe they have to make up things. Routine is really important, keeping routines if at all possible. A lot of times parents will say, oh, I want to let them rest and stay out of school because, you know, they're sad. Actually, the faster you get them back into their routine, the better they are. It helps them not get behind in school. It helps them get back into something that's normal and normalizes their day. It keeps them out of the chaos of just the whole grief. It's actually better for them emotionally to be back in their routine if they can. If they're not talking to you, because a lot of times we find with teens, they don't want to talk with their parents. When we talk about who are the people that they feel supportive, make sure they're talking to someone. Ask them, do you have somebody to talk to? You know, when things are hard, do you have, you know, a family member or a counselor at school, or who can you talk to that's safe for you? Because if it's not me, you really need to be able to talk to someone. That's really important. And then encourage additional support if you think they're struggling. If you think they really are having a hard time and maybe you're seeing them slip into what you are thinking could be a depression or even some suicide ideation or anything like that, then the best thing to do is to seek out support, because that's better to get that taken care of if you can. I know that the counselors can help you with finding some good resources for that based upon what your insurance is or how they can get that. And I know that they could do that for you. The other thing you have to remember is grief affects every part of you. It's going to affect you physically. We've seen people, one of our families came in and their daughter was having vision trouble. And they said they've gone to the eye doctor 3 times and they keep saying there's nothing wrong with her eyes. And when we covered this concept about how it affects you physically, the mom says, do you think that could be the grief? And she said, when we were talking, we said, yeah, it absolutely could be the grief. So she sat down with her daughter and said, do you miss Dad? What are you feeling about? And they had this really good heart-to-heart talk. And guess what happened with her eyes? Flared up. All of that talking to her mom was causing her to not be able to see well. Stomach aches and all that show up. Emotionally, like just feeling all over the place. We see that affect you. Cognitively, we've talked about how how we can't remember things. As adults, we forget things. They call it a fog. You get in this grief fog where you think you're doing things, but you can't even remember what you did 5 minutes ago. And you're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't remember anything. Very common in grief. Socially, we see a lot of people who want to be at home all the time. And then we see a lot of people that want to be out all the time. They don't want to be at home because home makes them think of terrible things, makes them miss the person. Or they want to be there because that's where that reminds them of the person. See how it can be either way. And each person in our family has one of those tendencies. And so we have to be able to listen to one another in order to kind of understand one another and be able to support them. That's why it's really important. One of the other things we talk about when we talk with our families in our grief groups is the most common thing I hear from families or kids when they say, what's different at home? They say it's quiet. And what we're talking about is that they all come home and everyone goes to their rooms and gets on their devices. And so what they do is we're trying to get them to come out of their rooms and begin to talk together and be able to have a common language. So the more you can kind of talk about just these things, if you notice them, not in a accusatory way, but just in a conversational way, the more it's going to help them begin to process their grief. The last one is spiritually. And this is a really big time for people, especially if it's a first death for them, a significant death for them. They really do question what happens after you die. And so you want to be able to let them explore that. Find them resources if you don't have the answers. I had a mom in one of my groups this last week, and she says they were asking all kinds of questions about faith, but she didn't know anything about it. So we were just giving her some resources of people that we know that will talk to kids, that are really good with kids and can answer their questions and let them explore. And then we have to talk a lot again to families who are very spiritual, that are very worried that their children are going to lose their faith, but they have to be able to explore that and understand that and feel safe enough to really, most of the times the kids come right back to where they were. 9 out of 10 times, that's the common thing, but the kids need a place to feel safe enough to explore that with, to question those things, okay? So what do you do as a parent when you're looking at supporting your children? So one of the big things is model healthy grieving. So all these things I'm talking about are things for you to be considering. Like, are you taking time for yourself? When you're remembering, are you sharing stories with them? Are you acknowledging your own grief? A lot of times parents, when they come in, they'll come in for their students, but they don't think they need the grief support themselves. And after they come through one of our support groups, they're like, oh, I needed it more than they did probably. And we know that. We're like, yeah, I'm glad you came too, because it's hard for us to think that we need the support, but a lot of times we really do need that support. And when you do that, when you say, I'm going to go too, it actually does model healthy grieving for them, that we can't do everything on our own. We do need other people, and it's okay, right? It's better for them to reach out for help. Even mom reaches out for help. Even dad reaches out for help. And that's actually a very healthy thing for them to do, and to let them see you cry if you're sad. I had another mom who, her son had died, and she would just cry only when the kids weren't there, but they heard her, and she didn't think they did. And so they would always try to just be happy around her because they didn't want to make her sadder. And she tried to cry so that they wouldn't see her sad, but they all were sad in their own ways. And that wasn't healthy. And so as she began to talk to them about she was having a hard day, one of the little boys went up to her and says, do you just need a hug today, Mom? And she's like, I do. And they were able to hug and they didn't have to talk much about it, but they could support one another and understand that we all have a hard day, and some days are harder for one than the other. And that's good. That's healthy. The other thing, you need to explore what coping looks like for your child. We don't all cope the same way with things. So finding what do they do that makes them feel better? What are their things that they do? And that way are even ways to alert you when you see them doing some of those things in excess, that maybe there's something going on with them, right? Like if they are an art person, they like to draw, and it's all of a sudden, man, they're drawing every day. This is different for them. Maybe that's something like, what's happening? How are things going at school or with your friends? And to realize that how you cope, like maybe you like to go out for a walk, may not be their coping style. So find out what is it that they do that makes them feel better. Maybe you can remind them if they're having a hard day, like maybe you want to listen to some music, or maybe you want to go out for a bike ride or something like that, whatever, because you'll know what the things are that help remind them when they need to maybe take a break and do something. Creating a safe space for your child to express their feelings is really important too. We have a lot of emotions as parents, and it's hard for us to not just react when they come in and say things. It's really, you have to almost develop a skill to be able to not feel personal about things when they're talking, because we do feel personal about things. But it's really important in the grieving process for them to feel like they can come in, because there is a lot of things like anger and guilt and shame. And so it's not really about us, but you want to allow them a place to explore that with you. And if you can't be that, then you need to find a place for them to do that. Sometimes with the parents, especially in teens, sometimes they can't do that with their family. They do need an outside place, which is things like what we do with them here at Pathways. But if they can't do it with you and you have the ability to not take it personally and let them do that, that's really a good place, because you're going to be with them their whole life. Other people are going to be with them a part of the journey, but you're going to be with them their whole life. And so the more you can build that, the better it's going to be for them. And then the last thing is about being honest with them. A lot of times I find parents try to protect their kids with death. They may not tell them what really happened, or they may not let them know things. You don't have to tell them all the details, but when they ask you a question, it's always better to just be completely honest with the question that they ask you. This comes up a lot when maybe someone has mental health issues, and they'll just say, oh, they just died. And they'll be like, but how did they die, right? And so maybe you say, well, they took a lot of pills or something like that. And then if they just leave it at that, you leave it at that. But if they were to ask you, like, why did they do that? Then you might say, you know what, they've had a hard time. Have you ever noticed they had a hard time? Like they struggled? And usually the kids will tell you, oh yeah, they have struggled a lot. I've seen they're sad a lot of times. Sometimes he just must have decided it was just so hard and just took too many pills. Those are the harder ones. Cancer, usually type of things they've seen them kind of having, or a long-term chronic illness. They've seen that. It's these sudden ones, or like even a car crash. Sometimes people won't tell them that they were killed in a car crash, but guess what? Somebody in your family is going to tell them the truth. And then the fact that you didn't tell them is going to cause other issues with you. So it's better to just be honest right from the start, because we want them to trust you with these types of things. And so the more honest you can be with them, the better it is for them. And then the last thing I just wanted to is to get them additional support. We say this over and over and over again, because I really want you to know it's totally okay and good for you to get the support for them if they can't have it, if they aren't going to let you help them, to make sure they're getting it from someone. I know anybody in your school, everyone at GAR has been so great about making sure that the kids have what they need. So just call one of them and let them know, my kid's struggling, or I'm noticing some things. Can you talk with them? And they will do that. And if it ends up being grief, they might even call us and we'll get involved with them to be able to help them if that's something that we can do. And then I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are, I think is the next one. Just knowing what we do at Pathways, we provide free bereavement support. You don't have to have insurance. You don't have to have Medi-Cal. You don't have to have anything. And we have different types of programs available for you. For families, we have a family group that meets, we actually met on site. We're on our last session, and the adults are in a group, the teens are in a group, the middle schoolers are in a group, and the elementaries are in a group. And you all learn the same concept each night, because we know sometimes you just don't know what to say about how to bring it up in a way that you're going to have a conversation. And so, like, for example, our first night is Death Brings Change. And so in each of the groups, we're talking about what are the changes we've seen, right? What are the things we've noticed? And then the intent is that in the car ride home, or that next week over dinner, or whenever you guys are together, you talk about, I was learning about change, or the kids might say, oh, we learned about change. And you say, I learned about change. And then you have a topic that you guys can actually converse with. It kind of helps guide you along the way of how to bring that up and how to talk about that. And then the next week when you come, we ask the parents, how'd that work for you? And they might say, I didn't know what to say, or I did, and we had a little conversation and it was good. We're just trying to help you build those bridges of communication and be able to support one another in that. So that's a really great program for the whole family to come to. But sometimes that's just not possible. It's just maybe you have to work in the nighttime, or there's transportation issues. We're in Lakewood and it's hard. So sometimes what we do is we actually just take the students. And this year, because we're all online with our students, anytime a student needs support and a grief support, we're actually putting them together with kids from other schools and other districts this year. And so as soon as we get 5 or more students, we're able to put together a group. We actually will call you as a parent and we will set up a time to do an assessment with your student and get you to sign all of the paperwork. It's just a consent form saying that you agree to it. And then we start a group. It's a 7-week session with your students. They'd meet once a week and they will do that. And then the last thing that we have for families, widows are a little bit different because once you've lost a husband, it's only a widow's, not a widower's. There's additional support that you need because you've lost a lot. You've lost a partner. You've lost somebody that helps you in parenting. You've lost a lot of times your best friend. You've lost maybe who does the mechanical duties. You've lost who does all the home fixing. It's a lot of things lost, and you're still trying to raise your family at the same time. And so we actually run a widows group every week as well for free with other widows to help you along the way to figure things out and to have a safe space. Because what we find with grief a lot of times is that people are really good. They're really good for a while with you, but then you feel like they're tired of hearing about your loss. And sometimes, especially if you're an intuitive griever, you need to talk a little bit more. And so these are great places for you to continue to talk about your loved one and feel like they really do care and want to hear, and they're going to help you along the way. So those are some things that we offer just for free here in Lakewood. We have our phone number down and our website there, and we would love to walk alongside anybody that thinks that they would need support. So, questions?
So it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box. But we can open up for questions if anybody does, want to share or wants to unmute themselves.
I just said it all, I guess, huh?
They were great.
You know what? You actually did. You actually did. It was a lot of great information. A lot of great information. And I loved how you gave specific examples for like the elementary students versus the high school students, because I definitely noticed, they kind of react to losses much differently. But it's good to know that and how we can best support our students, during that period. And we actually have a lot of students who are grieving, which I'm pretty sure many other schools are experiencing the same high numbers of students that are experiencing losses during this time. So I'm so glad that you came and you joined us. You provided this information. We'll be sure to post your agency's flyer on our website, so our families have, access to the community resources that are available for them. And before we go, I did want to acknowledge who we also have joining us tonight. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Ms. Smith, one of the mental health professionals at Garra High School. I oversee the 9th and 10th grade counseling referrals. We also have Ms. Perez. She's another mental health professional. She oversees the 11th and 12th grade counseling referrals. And then we have Ms. Knox, who's joining us tonight. She's our MSW intern, and she has worked with a few of our students as well. So you guys have the support on campus as well as in the community. So we want to make sure you guys are equipped and aware of the resources that you guys have available. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I think that is the end of our workshop. I wanted to direct you guys to our website. If you go to Garra High School's main website and go to the resource tab, you will go to the Student Resource Center. And there you can access all of the information about services that we provide in the mental health department, as well as how you can contact one of us for further support. And again, as Ms. Tammy mentioned, if you guys need additional assistance, we will love to refer you guys out to her agency so that, they're the experts there, and we want to make sure you guys are connected to them. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I think that's the end of it. And then I'll stop recording.